You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to another round of Snarky Faith Radio. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney. Welcome here again this week, here to Snarky Faith. And we're sitting here on a Tuesday that is very much, post-Super Bowl. If you could call it the Super Bowl, it didn't feel very super at all. And frankly, my takeaways from the Super Bowl is that I'm actually really worried. I'm really worried on a deep level about Mr. Peanut and the company that he's currently keeping. And that's as much as you're going to hear about me from the Super Bowl, because I found myself incredibly super bored during it. Oh, look what I did there. But today we're going to be talking about this issue that continues to hop up in the news that we've seen recently exemplified in the viral hashtag ExposeChristianSchools. We're going to be talking about the issues within Christian schools and within churches when you begin to create a bubble that keeps out thought and new ideas, and how that is ultimately very damaging to young people and kids in churches and in these Christian schools. So if you're a very big proponent of Christian schools, this may not be the show for you, but you should listen anyways. But before we get to any of that, and we've got an action-packed show today, we've got to get to what many of you come here for. You come here every week saying, Stuart, can you please give me my little taste? Give me my hit of the Christian crazy? And, I'm a good host. I'm here to give you what you want. I'm here to, unlike the Super Bowl, I'm here to give you what you want. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the Christian crazy of the week. Here we go.
Lord have mercy. The Lord is my shepherd. He know what I want.
Now, fair warning this week, the Christian crazy is going to move pretty fast, so buckle up, because we got a lot to talk about on the back end of the show. First up in the Christian crazy of the week, and it's one of those things where I'm just like, what the hell is happening here? Oh, yes, because the Virginia Senate, you know what it did? It approved legislation that would make it easier to bring guns into places of worship. Now, who would do this? Well, it's the GOP in Virginia. Yes, they recently, their Senate recently narrowly voted to support this legislation that would repeal a law that prohibits people from bringing guns and knives into places of worship during religious services. That's right. It somehow makes sense that if we're going to love Jesus, we need to be packing heat. We need to be doing this right here and right now. And the sad thing is, that's not the crazy thing that's happening in Virginia this week, because yeah. From the Super Bowl, we also got super bad Governor Northam. That's, good Lord, what is wrong with this man? He can moonwalk, and he apparently likes to do blackface and has buddies that wear hoods. Yeah, he's the Democratic governor of Virginia. It'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out, but you know what? The dude needs to step down. This is just gross. It's sick. And sorry there, Governor. Nothing I can do to bail you out on this one. It's just all bad. But you know what's worse? No, it's not the fact that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was out there saying that Trump was chosen by God. That's bad enough as it is. But I want to give you just the best crazy that you can get right now. So we're gonna distill it into one clip of crazy. So here's that clip.
You know, that prophecy, I don't know if you've seen that or not, but on the way up here, one of my guys that travels with me, he let me hear that tape again by Kim Clement, where Kim Clement said that there was going to be a man that was going to go in the White House. When he went in there, he'd be a praying man, et cetera, et cetera. But when he got in there, the Lord would fill him with the Holy Spirit. Now, this was in 2007. Bush was still president. Obama hadn't even become president yet.
Oh.
And Bush is still president. Kim prophesied this, and look what he said. We hadn't even heard it before, just heard it yesterday.
My.
He said, and he will build the walls. So I got news for Miss Pelosi.
Oh.
And I've got news. I've got news for Brother Schumer.
Okay.
But if Kim Clement prophesied that he's going to build the walls, he said he will put walls of security up around this country, then I believe that's a done deal. I don't know how this is going to break, but it's going to break in his favor, I believe, and I believe those walls will be built.
Now this comes from the Jim Baker Show. Come on, we love Jim around here, right? We ironically love Jim. And this is from a prophet, John Kilpatrick, that's talking about why the wall is going to make sense and why the wall is going to happen because God said it. What the hell is wrong with you? But I also do love how when you talk to Jim Baker about the wall, he kind of has his own little spiritual orgasm. You listen to that again where he's like, oh, praise the Lord, PTL, and smokes a cigarette.
So I got news for Miss Pelosi.
Oh. 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 Oh.
That spiritual orgasm brought to you by Jim Baker. But enough of this crazy. Let's get to the main story of the week. And that topic is the problem with Christian schools. Now, all of this talk about Christian schools has kind of come to a head recently after news of Karen Pence, or actually, we should call her by her real name, Mother Pence.
Mother?
Yes, after it was found out that Mother Pence was working for a school that discriminates against LGBTQ staffs and students. And also, we had that fun bit with the Covington Catholic schoolboys. You know the face of white privilege and douchery? Remember those kids? Yeah, we all do. Love them. Such little scamps. Oh, those guys, they're little scamps. They are little scamps. They had every right to stand there. Every right to do it. Yeah, whatever. And so all of those stories dominating the news cycle led to a hashtag. There's a hashtag, ExposeChristianSchools. And that came from writer Chris Stroop, whom, if you're not familiar with him, over on the Twitter bot, he was also the guy that coined the hashtag Empty the Pews. And he brought this up wanting to be able to write about weird stuff, weird, naughty, bad stuff that happens at Christian schools, and wanting to be able to expose all of that, especially after we've seen the crazy from Mother Pence and the Covington little a-holes out there. And what happened after him starting this is really kind of been an interesting... Well, it's been an interesting viral story to watch because on two hands, responding on Twitter to this, you either have the folks that, that are from the conservative ilk that are really defending Christian schools, and then you have folks that have been through it saying, yeah, this is really bad. This happened. And guess what? Again, on topics like this, we in America are very divided. I know it's a shocker. Division in America? What? Polarization? What's that? I don't even know. But yes. So I want to do a little bit of a dive, not really a deep dive, but I want to do a little bit of a dive into the fallacies behind Christian schools. And at least from my opinion, why more often than not, they're just a bad idea. Now, I'm not here to do a hit job against Christian schools. There may be good ones out there. The ones that I have either spoken at or been around in my past, I'll speak openly about what I know, but I'll also be very open about the things that I don't know. And just wanting to be able to lay that out as I'm talking about this, that I'm throwing a very broad net over what I'm speaking. And as I've kind of seen how folks are arguing back and forth online about this, what I am saying is by no means something that happens in all of them, but I am going to kind of speak to the average Christian school out there, and the average parent that wants to send their kid to an average Christian school out there, if that makes sense. So we're going to be talking about this, and again, like what I'm saying, I'm sure as I go through and and make fun of things and tell you personal stories of experiences that I've had, that those may not be your stories, but they may very well be your stories. So that's just kind of my little caveat, my little preemptive warning that goes across this. Yes, you may have gone to a wonderful Christian school out there and your life is peachy keen and awesome, but by and large, Christian schools, and I'm just going to go ahead out here on a limb and just go ahead and say that they're generally a bad idea for Christians, and I'm going to tell you why. But before we get to the why, let's get to what has happened after this whole movement, or this hashtag movement, I guess, started online. And I wanted to kind of talk between both sides of how folks are being able to process this and handle this. And of course, how folks in the media kind of take it far right and far left as we walk this out. Sound good? Is that a good way for us to start this whole thing out? I'm asking rhetorically into the air, so if you're not nodding, I apologize, because I'm going to keep going. And just assume that you're all nodding and saying, sweet, go ahead, because I'm going to start now, and I will go ahead. Final warning, we may also have a couple of shots that go out against Christian homeschooling. So just go ahead and just, you've been forewarned. And yeah, you've been forewarned. So there, dear listeners, let's talk about us some Christian schools. And you can't talk about Christian schools without talking about the bubble that Christian parents want to encapsulate their children within. The desire for parents to be Christian homeschoolers and of the like. It's a similar impulse that you somehow want to put your kids in a Ziploc bag, hermetically seal them from the rest of the world, because that is the only way you can protect their faith. I mean, seriously, I read articles. I'm not going to call out this mom blogger. I'm not going to do it. And she wrote an article as I was kind of doing some research about the hidden dangers of sending your kids to private Christian schools. And I loved how, again, I'm not calling her out, so I don't want to tell you how crappy her viewpoint is, her reasons are. So that's why I'm not telling you who wrote this. But she begins to talk about these ideas, and it's one of those situations where you hear someone saying something, you're like, oh honey, you're kind of getting there, when to pat someone on the head, be like, oh, good for you. But her main reasons, this mom blogger, for the idea of Christian schools being bad is that it really teaches your kids complacency. And that you're putting them in a bubble, which again, yes, complacency and in a bubble, sure. And again, I guess as I'm ripping this, I'm actually agreeing with parts of what she's saying. She says stuff like, your kids need to be able to make their faith on their own, which is absolutely true. But ultimately, what's missing, the large point of the problem within these schools, within the Karen Mother Pence of these schools, is the fact of how damaging that bubble can be. How damaging that bubble can be to kids that are growing up and beginning to realize that they identify as LGBTQ. How damaging that can be when you raise your kids to be little a-holes that go out and wear red MAGA hats and act like the president in front of other people. And it doesn't go so well. But ultimately, all of these problems become a huge problem because none of this has to do with Jesus. I mean, when we think about these, think about historically within Christian schools. I mean, we can think about like topics like intolerance, topics like misogyny. We can talk about the ideas of like how we like to have revisionist history within churches because they do, and within churches and Christian schools like this, there's these ideas that science doesn't matter, and that dress codes only matter if you're a girl. I mean, back in the day, we would see schools that would outlaw dancing and things like that, but when you step inside these zones, it gets very, like, for lack of a better term, very like ingrown and inbred, especially when it comes to thought processes. When it comes to the fact of being able to teach young people to think for yourself, because that would be my greatest hope for my children. And as much as I like to rip on homeschoolers, for the elementary years, my wife and I did homeschool our kids. We homeschooled our kids because we lived in an area where public schools were horrible, and I did not want to scar my kids intellectually. We did not do it to hide our kids away from the rest of the world. And at that same time, we were also acting as like homebound missionaries. So it's a real fun thing when you're hanging out with other missionaries, and your kids are the kids that have their iPhones full of music that other kids aren't allowed to listen to. And they say, "Dad, what's wrong with the music I listen to?" And I tell you, nothing's wrong with the music you listen to. You enjoy it, and it speaks to truth. And it just doesn't happen to be what you would call quote unquote Christian. Because what ends up happening in all of this, in this desire to be able to control, and really, the whole idea behind Christian schools is a control structure. You want to control the way your kids think. And when those things happen, bad things happen. And when I say bad things happen, like, I'm actually speaking to being able to replicate and copy weird viewpoints like you hear at the beginning of our show every week in the Christian Crazy. You end up creating these spaces where that kind of insanity kind of makes sense. I mean, we end up creating spaces where gaslighting makes sense, and gaslighting happens, and it's okay, where folks defend the gaslighting that's happening. We create situations where young people do not feel safe in their homes, in their churches, and in their schools. Now, when I'm attacking Christian schools, by and large, what I'm not doing is this. I'm not saying that, like, the quality of education of public schools everywhere is far superior to that of Christian schools. But what I will say about public schools for raising kids, and raising kids that you hope will know about who Jesus is, public schools are a great place. Because guess what? Public schools in many ways look like the rest of life. So when you're trying to do some sort of a spiritual formation for kids in a vacuum, and think about this. So we're going to create kids, and we want to hide them from the world. We want to create them in a spiritual vacuum where they're never exposed to anything that could mess with their faith or make them believe otherwise, right? So we do that, and here's what happens. We send them to a Christian school, and hopefully they get into a Christian college. And then afterwards, they'll go out into the world and be able to fully function. No, that doesn't happen. These schools do not prepare kids for the rest of the world. And the sad fact is, in many places, and I know many of these that exist. I know people that have sent their kids to these that I know. But you end up seeing these schools that come up. A lot of times they are also associated with local churches. A lot of times with mega churches, because mega churches know how to make money, and creating a school is another way to be able to make money. What? It's not about Christian education? Oh no, silly people. It's about making money. I've even seen mega churches that will have a Christian school, and they'll also create their own Christian college that you can continue to move from high school right into college. And just because we call it a college doesn't mean that it's any kind of higher education. And it also needs to be said, for all of this, anytime we're talking about private Christian schools and private Christian colleges, those suckers are expensive. And those suckers, by and large, again, I'm saying by and large, not everyone are giving you a subpar education at a premium price. And parents do it because they want their little darlings to be good Christians that vote Republican and wear red hats. Now, I'm not, okay, like I've said before, and I've said this probably many times in this, is that there may be good Christian schools out there. There may be. There may be good Christian colleges out there. I'm not speaking to all of them, but I am speaking to a lot of them. And we see this, that the one thing the parents desire is to be able to protect their kids. But the one thing that we've seen from churches, the church's desire is to be able to pay the bills and make some money with the expensive buildings that we have created. And so this whole thing ends up being this capitalistic system that is hidden with this fake piousness, this fake spirituality. It's a money-making scheme, which, again, we've talked about this ad nauseum on this show before in the past, the idea that, we have a president that all these evangelicals and conservatives love, who is really just like President Ponzi scheme that has moved from one thing to the next. And a lot of these churches do the same friggin' thing. So why wouldn't they follow a guy that's kind of, we're all following the same playbook in this weird world and way. So I know that when all this stuff came out with being able to have this, hashtag #ExposeChristianSchools, you'll see the conservatives that'll push back saying, oh no, my kids had a great experience. Oh no, these people had a great experience here. Yes. And I think that's fair. There may be people out there that have had great experiences. And I'm not discounting those good experiences. But I am saying there are a lot of bad experiences. There are a lot of experiences that have led kids towards depression and suicide. There have been instances, especially within the Catholic Church, and I'm not completely trying to lump them into all of this, but you can't talk about this without talking about the abuses within the Catholic Church. Also, the abuses within the Christian church here in America, the evangelical church in America too. And we continue just to see this process that ends up being more political in nature than it does based on education. And then we have someone like Betsy DeVos in the mix here that is operating from a Christian school mentality. Again, a person that went to Christian schools and went to a Christian college and was totally insulated by her family's wealth and common sense and whatever else you can pin on why Betsy DeVos is the way Betsy DeVos is. I don't want to go there. I don't want to get into her head. I think it's just too much of a scary place that may leave me to places that would put me in then Mike Pence's headspace, which is also weird and bizarre and scary and sketchy. And yes, because ultimately the problem with all of this, and I'm going to tell you some stories. From my own personal experience that I've had within myself and within others about why Christian schools can be dangerous, especially when you end up having schools that pop up like charter schools that end up operating very much for profit and very much in a vacuum of accountability. Bad things tend to happen. And as we've seen before, Christians are great at being able to have weird scandalized stuff where whether it be like based upon greed or sexual issues, kind of goes underground. And then those stuff ends up messing and pouring out onto other people. I say that when you begin to see people that get caught up in, you have folks that end up molesting kids. You have folks that end up embezzling money and the like. And a lot of these happen outside of situations of accountability. And so, with all of that in mind, I think I need to tell you guys some stories. So on the topic of Christian schools, when we're going through this, I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk through some of my experiences. So I had to share with you a couple little snarky stories about my experiences with Christian schools as a part of our larger story of why they're just generally a bad idea. So, first story, I'll tell you here. I used to be the director of a nonprofit organization that was an outreach to young people in a community in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. To be more specific, I don't want to try to get too specific, But in this specific town, there was a large Christian school. And okay, the best part of this story is its name, and then it only gets better. So the name of the school was, wait for it, Master's Touch. Because again, when we talk about Christian schools, we talk about a group of people that are so far out of touch of common culture, they have no idea what's going on, enough to think that naming a school called the Master's Touch was a good and godly idea. So we start there, and hell yes, it's creepy. And hell yes, the school ended up closing because of exactly what you would expect it to. Something involving the Master's Touch or the Headmaster's Touch. The headmaster who had hidden away a student and given the student an area to live in the school to have their own little private love den. Yes. Now, I say this out of sheer mockery and not out of the fact that this is a horribly disgusting situation, a horribly disgusting story by a horribly disgusting man that was in charge of this disgusting school. Now, I don't bring them up to simply just make fun of them. I bring them up to tell you about a time me, the guy that was a director of a Christian outreach that was in their community, was invited. The first and only time this guy was invited to their school. I was invited by said headmaster, or the one with a little, had a little touchy problem, that guy? Yeah, that guy. So I was invited there, and they told me, oh, we like the ministry that you guys are doing, and we want you to be able to, give our kids a challenging word. And I took him at his word that they wanted something challenging in regards to faith. They did not. And so I had been working for an evangelistic organization at this time. And so I was in charge of doing one of their chapel sessions. Chapel sessions meaning that I'm going to be their main speaker on a certain day of the week, and I have roughly 30 minutes to 45 minutes to talk to these kids. And now, this is mainly that they've thrown in here. Thankfully, it's high school and middle school kids, because I probably would have made the younger ones cry. But I'm not confirming or denying the fact that there may have been tears involved in this. And so I begin this talk by asking this simple question of them. A simple question that shouldn't be something that would be earth-shattering, but it ended up being that. So I asked these students in more of an interactive kind of lecture, I asked them, what do you think it means to be a Christian? Simple enough, right? Simple enough. And I begin to get like little hands go up. I'm getting little pad answers. It means to love Jesus. It means to follow God. All these other kind of stuff. And so it occurred to me very quickly that most of the students knew like the standard pad answers that they were given. What does it mean? Oh, I follow Jesus with all of my heart. Jesus is my boyfriend. All that kind of fun stuff that tends to happen in this ingrained weird Christian culture. And so I begin to ask them, so I get off the stage as I'm walking around with the microphone talking, and I was like, so what does it mean to be a Christian first? And it means to love God. And so I asked them the question. I was like, okay, so are you saying that you're Muslim? And to their horror, no, I'm not Muslim. Why would you say that? Well, you simply just told me you love God. And then they're like, very quickly, oh, we love Jesus. And then it spiraled into, oh, so you're Mormon. You're telling me that you're Mormon right here. And again, it spirals and continues. And so my whole point of this was really being, and the thrust of the talk was being able to open them up to saying, if you want to go and tell the world that you're a Christian, you better darn well know what that means. And what was happening during this entire session was eye-opening to many. I had a few teachers come up afterwards and be like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying this. And then I had a bunch of others that were really not happy with me, a bunch of other children that were on the verge of tears that were not happy with me. And no, I was not goading them that hard. If I really wanted to have fun, I could have, but I didn't. But I was really trying to paint to them that this idea of what it means to follow after Christ is something that matters. It's something that involves commitment. It's something that involves sacrifice and compassion. And going to a Christian school, see, here's the kicker that ruined a lot of kids. Going to a Christian school does not make you a Christian. doesn't even make you closer to God. See, those are those things that you don't need to say in a Christian school, but I did anyways, and it was fun. And that in a nutshell was like one of my first, and this has been many years, eye-opening experiences to begin to see the fact that, if the implicit idea of the parent is to send the kid to a Christian school, their idea is that we want them to be better Christians. But what I was trying to expose to these kids and get them thinking about this, in the hopes of them actually learning to own what their faith is, was the fact that going to a Christian school does not make you Christian. Going to a Christian church does not make you Christian. Saying you're a Christian does not make you Christian. The thing that makes you Christian is following after Jesus, following his teachings, doing the things that Christ calls us to do. It's not about politics. It's not about getting wrapped up in all of this other stuff that Christians like to get wrapped up in. And the more like I hung around there and talked to people, I began to realize more and more that this Christian school, and I would come to find out later, was not the only Christian school that had this problem. You see, what parents ultimately want, they will say that they want their kids to go to a Christian school to be able to help them to live out their faith, champion their faith, know who they are in Jesus. But really, they want their kids indoctrinated. They want their kids indoctrinated. They want someone else to do the spiritual formation work for their kids because the parents have no idea what their own spiritual formation is. And really what they want from this Christian school is to create a bubble for their children, a bubble that hides them from the evil sin of the rest of the world. But for the rest of us to know this, there's messed up crap that happens everywhere, even at Master's Touch Academy. Boop. Don't believe me? On top of that, I remember also sitting down. There was a family that was at a church I was attending, and I was especially working for an organization that was Christian but kind of outside the church. I ended up being the kind of the de facto person that people, when they were having problems with their kids or their teenagers, and youth ministry in the church wouldn't fix it because the youth ministry in the church was pretty much in a bubble like the rest of the world. They would come and ask me about the real problems they had with their kids. And I remember one parent, and I knew the guy pretty well, and he'd asked me, he's like, I really think I need to put my daughter in a Christian school. And this is a different one in this other Christian school. And he's like, because I'm really worried about the drugs that are in the public school. Now, I'd done volunteer work in the alternative schools and the public high schools, and I've been in and around Christian ministries and Christian schools in my life. And I told him this, and this is absolutely true, especially for a lot of Christian schools. I told him this. So you want to send your daughter here so she will be hidden away and drugs will not exist and she will just continue to be pure and wonderful. I didn't say it that sarcastically, but that was the thrust of what I was saying. And he essentially nods, uh-huh. And I said, do you realize like the dynamics of the culture in Christian schools and how this works? And especially the one that I knew after volunteering and working in the alternative school in town. Code for alternative school in most towns are the school that handles the kids that couldn't handle public school. And what tended to happen, and again, the kids in the alternative school were not bad kids. I think they were kids that just needed a little extra attention and didn't need to be treated like a bunch of sheep because they had unique perspectives. They were just as smart as the kids at the regular school. But what I began to see was this, is that you would have kids that would get in trouble in a public school. They'd get sent to the alternative school. And then they'd eventually get into trouble in the alternative school. And then their parents would be forced with the problem. Where do I send them? Oh, hey, let's send them to the Christian school, the big Christian school in the area. Why? Because the Christian school will take those kids because Christian schools are all about money. That's a larger point that we can get into in a little bit. But Christian schools are all about the dollars. Dollar make me holla for Jesus is kind of how it works. And so I'm telling this dad, I was like, here, just look at this. Here's the paradigm of really what happens in Christian schools. So you have parents that are terrified of the world and do not want their kids to end up worldly or whatever the hell that means, because we're all in the world and there's no way really to hide from the world and culture and all that kind of stuff. But so you want to hide your kids. You want to make sure your kids are pure and they never see a rated R movie and even stay away from the PG-13 ones. Is that what you want? And the dad's like, basically. and said, okay, so picture this. You have these kids on this far side over here. They have been coddled. They have been sheltered from the world. They have been, told that everything cultural is bad. But kids aren't dumb. They realize that there's a lot of stuff going on outside the bubble zone that the parents have tried to encapsulate them in, right? So you've got these kids that do not have any exposure on one side, and then you've got the Christian school, which again, will take pretty much about anybody as long as you're willing to pay money. So you've got these other kids that didn't cut it in the public school and didn't cut it in the alternative school. So what you do is you have kids that, if I'm using Christian terms, again, that I don't necessarily stand behind, but in Christian terms, would be very worldly. Some of these kids may have been kicked out of the other schools because of drugs or other unsavory activities, right? You got that there? And so I'm telling this dad, I was like, picture this. Kids that have never been exposed to barely anything, let alone a rated R movie. Kids that have been kicked out of several schools because of drugs and other unsavory activities. You put them together, and the biggest problem you have here is there's not much middle ground between them. Like naturally in any public school, you're going to have middle ground. You're going to have, again, I know I'm painting this in really broad strokes, not saying one side is good or the other, but in a normal public school, you're going to have like the goody kids that really care about their education, and you have the kids that don't give a rip about anything. And then you have got the kids on that spectrum that are somewhere in between. So to go from one end to the other, it takes a bit of a journey, right? But not in a Christian school. Oh no, brother, that's not how it works. No. You've got one side, you've got the other side, and you've got nothing in between. And that in between causes a vacuum that makes things very accessible. That's how you see kids getting pregnant in Christian schools. That's how you see kids getting on drugs in Christian schools, because the Christian schools, as much as they want to tell you that we will protect your little darlings from the world, the point of Christianity, the point of the human existence, is not about hiding away from reality. Not. And especially for parents that want to do the best with their kids, that want to do the best with their little kids. Teach them to think. Teach them to engage in culture. Teach them to use their brains. And if you want your kids to be little Jesus freaks, teach them to look at the world around them like Jesus would. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do? How can I help others? Because the problem with all of this, the problem with all of this stuff that gets lumped in here with this, is the sheer fact that Jesus doesn't call us to retreat from the world. Jesus calls us to engage in it, not to run around condemning it and pointing fingers. No, he doesn't call us to create our own schools where Mother Pence can hang out and they can keep the unsavory LGBTQ people away from us. Or where you end up being like an asshole factory like the kids at Covington High School. You end up having this, and what you end up seeing is you end up raising kids that have a very, very, very narrow perspective of the world, just like their parents. This isn't about education. This is about indoctrination. You see kids that are not taught to think about their choices. No, they're told to be anti-choice. You see that when you begin to talk about even things like sex education in Christian schools, kids are told a very specific, narrow view of how this is. And again, they're not told to use their minds. They're not told to use judgment. They're just told no. And tools like guilt and shame are used on them over and over again, to where you end up having folks like Mike Pence that have a really twisted and warped perspective of what sexuality is and what like the roles of men and women are. It becomes this weird like misogynistic bleh, whatever bleh it is. Cluster, how's that? Is that better? But situations like this also, when you continue to speak and teach children in this dichotomy of good is away from the world, bad is of this world. What you're doing is you're actually training them to be intolerant. And then furthermore, in most Christian schools, we'll continue to preach this idea of absolute creationism as science. And I'm not talking about where you believe in the faith and what you believe in the Bible, but this idea that there's only one way to see things. That somehow to believe the creation narrative means you have to 100% believe the Bible and reject all science, and that there's not anything in the middle. You see, situations like these create kids that have no idea what nuance is, that have no idea how to operate in the gray spaces in life where things aren't black and white. And we end up seeing it creating dysfunction, and dysfunction breeds dysfunction. And we continue to see people that end up being these weird, like mutant figures that look nothing like Jesus. Jesus operated well in society. He operated with the poor and the outcasts. He could operate with the rich and the wealthy. Jesus was able to move between them because Jesus wasn't an a-hole. And if you want to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that would mean that God's not an a-hole. So why do you want your kids to be a-holes? Mainly because you're afraid. And that's the sense that I've gotten when I've talked to parents over time about this whole idea of Christian schools, and why I continue to tell them it's a bad idea. It's rarely about education. It's rarely about education. And I will say this, I'm speaking in very, very blanket terms here. So there may be good ones here, and there may be good things happening. So I'm just kind of talking about this, and especially when you have schools that aren't regulated by much of anything. When schools that aren't really held to a higher accountability, you end up having weird stuff that happens, like A, the Catholic Church, or B, even stories like I've seen, hopefully not literally seen, but been in the same community as, where you end up having these weird kind of Jim Baker-esque like sexual escapades or money laundering or other stuff like that within the schools, a place that people are trying to send their kids there because they want their kids to be safe. And so this whole story that we've been talking about this hour here on the show is not really just telling you that raising your kids Christian is bad. But if you want to raise your kids to be like Jesus, you want to put down the money to be a part of these private Christian schools, just know what you're getting yourself into. But ultimately, your role as a parent is to raise your own kids. I've worked for nonprofits. I've been a youth pastor, and I've seen this time and time again. Parents that have not been through any kind of spiritual formation, that parents that really don't even understand what their faith means, they expect other people to fix the faith and spirituality of their own kids. And that's just not the way it works. That's just not how formation works. That's not how you walk kids through understanding what it is to be a child of God, what it means to follow Jesus, and the difficulty that all of that comes with. It's not about hiding from the world. It's not about standing your ground or defending your rights. No, it's learning how to be a decent human. I mean, I feel like in many ways, Jesus came to the earth to to teach us how to be decent human beings and not a-holes to the rest of us. But the sad fact of the matter is that most Christians look like the pharisaical a-holes that Jesus was preaching against. And they raise little pharisaical a-holes that wear MAGA hats and stare down people in Washington and do it because that's my right to do it. Maybe it's your right to do it. But is that the right decision to make? Is that what you want to be known for? You want to be known for that. I've seen it. I've seen it time and time again. Even as youth pastors, parents will come in and say, like, I need you to fix my kid. I need him to believe this, this, and this, and act this, this, and this. And I'm like, I see your kid 2 hours a week. You're their father. As parents, ultimately, we don't need to abdicate our roles. And it's not easy. I'm a dad of 4, and it's not easy. I don't have it figured out, but I hopefully stumble in the right direction towards that. But ultimately, when we talk about things like Christian schools and exposing all of this hypocrisy that's behind them, ultimate thing is this. Do you want your kids to be more like Jesus? Then teach them. Teach them by your own example. Walk it out. You be Jesus and let them watch you being Jesus. The idea that you're paying other people to make your kids like Jesus, hopefully so they don't go to hell. That's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. And so I think when we get into these arguments about Christian schools or not, it really comes down to the fact that do people trust God, that God is alive in the world today? Do people trust that actually following after Jesus and actually honestly following his teachings matter? Because by and large, the parents of kids that send, I'm going to be hella judgmental right here, but I'm going to be honest. The parents that can afford to send their kids to Christian schools look very little like Jesus. And this isn't just a money thing. They want their kids to be like them. They want their kids to believe like them. They want their kids to vote like them. And again, none of these things have anything to do with being a follower of Jesus. Nope. It's more about politics and it's more about preference. And that is really the point of all this. And as I'm recording this, I'm just going to tell you this. This is really, really funny. So as I'm recording this for the show, I just got on my phone, I got a message from one of my dear cousins. So shout out, what's up, Laura? And she had sent me this, which is hilarious because I'm literally recording that I'm talking about a situation that's kind of like this. Off topic, but on topic. She sent me this article, and actually, to end the show, I really just want to read through this. This is an article over on Medium by Ken Wilson, and the article is called this. And this is, I like to do the good of the week, and I don't do it every week because I don't always find good to brag about this week, but this is good. This is good, and I'm gonna use this as kind of as a footnote, not a footnote, a bookend to this show. That's a better way to put it. And so Ken Wilson wrote this article called "They Call Themselves Mama Bears. Churches that mess with their LGBTQ kids should listen up." And literally, I really enjoy this article, and it's short. So you're gonna get the article. I'm gonna go ahead and just quote Ken, because Ken's words are better than my own. So Ken said this: "There's a movement growing amongst the mothers of LGBTQ kids from churches that make their lives miserable. They call themselves Mama Bears, and they are quietly organizing. Emily Swan and I are connected to about 3,000 of these moms who belong to a secret Facebook community. Last year, it was 2,000, and it started in 2014 with only a handful. Similar groups are forming and will continue to grow. A public blog called it's something like the Serendipity of Moms. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Tells one such story. And it goes like this: these moms are mostly from conservative churches, many of which shush women to begin with and promote policies that stigmatize their kids. Just to be clear, such churches represent the vast majority on the current Christian landscape. And if that changes, it will be in no small part due to the mama bears finding each other, sharing their stories, learning together how to support their kids, and at long last, finding their voice. That process is well underway. I heard many of their stories, and they are remarkably similar. They involve a beloved church, then a child who gains the courage to come out to them, provoking a time of heart-rendering, then soul-searching, followed by a fierce determination to stand by their young, which puts them at odds with their church community. They stay, often at a distance, or leave the church, but they stick with their kids. And in due time, they get mad on behalf of their children. There is no pure anger than the one that proceeds from a tender heart. Gotta love that. Early in the process, these moms often gather enough nerve to meet with the pastor of the church they're leaving, or hope will change. In large churches, they may go up. In larger churches, they may go up a few chain of command layers until they are sitting in the office with the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves telling their story. They are met with warmth and sympathy from the pastor. They offer prayers, but nearly always the session ends with an institutional-friendly refusal to change the policies that their kids are defective. These are the policies that promote stigma and shame that do great harm to their children. Often these moms feel outmatched, out-talked, and out-Bibled by their pastors, but they go home and they find their way to one of these support groups and they find their bearings. They do their homework. They learn there is a small but growing uprising within their conservative church world, with the minority opinions emerging, insisting their Bibles have been misread. Take Romans 1, the chief clobbler text used against kids. Whatever the author, St. Paul, meant, it cannot apply to people it does not in any way describe, which is their LGBTQ kids. Some of these moms do a deep dive and learn about the prevailing practices of the Greco-Roman world, pederasty, same-sex, phallic, celebratory orgy sex, and temple prostitution, practices that have nothing to do with what their kids are dealing with. Their study, which spreads within their online support community, fuels a steady burning righteous anger at the unnecessary suffering endured by their children. The moms have had their own taste of suffering as they stand with their kids over and against a beloved faith community, which is only great if you're straight. What comes of their tender hearts, made more tender by hearing stories of other moms, combined with this steady anger, has yet to be revealed. But it's not going away. And those who spend any time with these moms understand that these women will prevail. Their numbers increase, so will their nerve and their creativity and their love. Increasingly, they won't go to talk to their pastors alone or with a similarly intimidated spouse. They will go in 2s and 3s with their friends and waiting in the waiting area, praying, armed with a reading of the Bible that insists, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the Bible, and love does no harm to the neighbor. Some of them will know the New Testament Greek words mistranslated homosexual offender and the like better than their pastors do. But mainly, they will come with their fierce love. I'm guessing that conferences will spring up for these moms to hear them, to help them empower each other, to spread their growing body of wisdom. As they gather, they will feel the power resident amongst them. Increasingly, perspectives offered in secret online communities will be shouted from the rooftops as the bearer of good news himself predicted. When a church claims to be welcoming and pops up on a Google search as a gay-friendly while hiding its stigmatizing policies, these moms will object to tell their friends, leaving clarifying comments. Some of these moms, mark my words, will start their own churches, and they will not be deterred just because it's a bear market for churches these days. A bear market indeed. Conditions are ripe for the mama bears to rise up. Those are some good words by Ken Wilson and Emily Swan, who are co-pastors of the Blue Ocean Faith, an Ann Arbor-centered, a Jesus-centered inclusive church. And I love stories like this, and I bring up stories like this, connecting in as we're talking about Christian schools, about the fact that these schools, about the fact that these churches are not about the love of Jesus. They're not about the inclusion of Jesus. They're not about the affirming message of Jesus. That these kids matter, that their spirituality matters, that their sanity matters, that their mental health matters, that their sexuality matters. And when we continue to push and push and push in the Christian world to be more and more divisive and be more and more rigid, the problem is that the Christian church, especially the evangelicals and the conservative Christians, they're alienating their children. They're misinforming their children. And they are creating little hateful assholes that move out into the world and act like assholes do. And Jesus, take this to the bank, Jesus was not an asshole. So if Jesus was not an asshole, why are so many of his followers assholes and raising assholes? And that's all I've got this hour. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Just a reminder, as we end this broadcast, that you can also catch us on podcast at www.snarkyfaith.com. And as I send you out into the world this week, I send you out with the holiest amount of snark and grace and peace. Go out and make this world a better place. I'll catch you guys next week. I'm out of here.
WCOM is listener-supported community radio, and Snarky Faith is only possible through our sponsors. Lumen, a spiritual community of seekers, sojourners, question askers, doubters, and skeptics, is a collective of fellow travelers that embrace the truth that all of life is sacred, hope is real, and tomorrow can be a better day than today. All are welcome. You can find more information at www.lumencommunities.com.